You're watching Poland Daily, and my name is Aleksander Wierzejski. The Polish Ministry of Health reported 69 new coronavirus cases on Sunday. The number remains one of Europe's lowest counted per capita. The ministry also announced that more than 16 million Poles have been fully vaccinated.
Poland has had some of Europe's lowest numbers of new daily cases in the last few months. As experts stress, vaccinations are the most effective weapon in the fight against the epidemic. According to the latest data, over 39% of the Polish population has already been fully vaccinated. It's practically the only method that can make sure that there won't be any additional waves of the pandemic. Meanwhile, more than 54,000 new infections were detected in the UK in the past 24 hours. This is the fifth consecutive day with the highest balance of infections in the fourth wave of the outbreak, and the highest daily number since January 15th this year. The fourth wave, as experience shows, not only from the UK, Czech Republic, but also Germany, where there was a 57% week-to-week increase last week, a figure not seen since the start of the pandemic, shows that the Delta variant is very contagious. Today, 69 new cases of coronavirus infection have been reported in Poland. 32 million vaccinations have been performed, with 16 million people fully vaccinated.
Representatives of the Polish and Italian governments met today in the Italian city of Ancona to commemorate the 77th anniversary of the city's liberation by Polish soldiers during the Second World War. The ceremony was attended by a 97-year-old veteran of the Polish Second Corps, a participant in the battles of Monte Cassino, Bologna and Ancona, Captain Władysław Dąbrowski.
496 Polish soldiers were killed and almost 2,000 wounded during the Battle of Ancona. The Second Polish Corps, under General Władysław Anders, fought for 2 days for the liberation of the strategically important Adriatic port. Poland's ambassador to Italy, Anna Maria Anders, daughter of General Anders and head of the Office for Veterans and Victims of Repression, Jan Józef Kasprzyk, participated in the anniversary commemoration in the Marsh region. Only a few combatants are still alive. Captain Władysław Dąbrowski remembers his comrades. Each time I visit the cemetery, I pray for my colleagues who lay here. We were a very close-knit group. We were young, all of us went through prisons in Soviet Siberia. For 2 years we fought side by side. The Polish soldiers entered Ancona already at 2 p.m. Most of their German opponents chose captivity over death against the advice of their commander. However, the German 992nd Grenadier Regiment virtually ceased to exist. The capture of Ancona and the rapid restoration of the city's port within 5 days was the only operation carried out by the Polish armed forces in the West that was entirely independent.
A large group of protesters have demonstrated outside the White House in Washington, D.C. in solidarity with the protests in Cuba that started last weekend. The protesters also called on President Joe Biden to take a tougher stance against the Cuban communist regime.
The crowd chanted slogans in Spanish and held banners and signs demanding action from the U.S. government. In the wake of the protests, U.S. President Joe Biden called Cuba a failed state that is repressing its citizens. The statements indicate that it's unlikely he would lift crippling sanctions anytime soon that have contributed to the country's worst economic crisis in decades.
My grandmother left in 1970 with every expectation of going back, and because of the dictatorship in Cuba, we have not been afforded that opportunity. Our family is dying in record numbers with COVID, with starvation, and we will not let them stand alone. We must stand with them, and even though we can't be by their sides physically, we will continue to fight on this side and ask for intervention, ask for humanitarian aid. This isn't about vaccines and about the blockade. This is about saving human lives, saving children's lives.
Thousands of Cubans have taken part in protests over the past week over shortages of basic goods, curbs on civil liberties, and the government's handling of the surge in COVID-19 infections, the most significant unrest in decades in the Caribbean island nation.
It's a dictatorship. You cannot live. You have the opportunity in Cuba. You cannot make a business, you cannot say anything, and you go to jail or they kill you. It's horrible. That's why Cuba is now in misery, in a very infrastructure problem. There is nothing, and it's because of communism.
Throughout the week in the United States, and especially in Florida, which has a large community of Cuban exiles, demonstrators have staged protests, waving Cuban flags and calling for change.
Australia's two largest states reported slight declines in new COVID-19 infections today. Nevertheless, its authorities warned that it could be days before the tough lockdown measures they have introduced can show progress in containing the spread of the Delta variant.
The country's most populous city, Sydney, and all of Victoria State, totaling nearly half of the country's 25 million population, are under stay-home orders after a flare-up of the highly infectious virus strain began last month. The state of New South Wales, in which Sydney is the capital, reported 105 new cases in the previous day, down from 111 the day before, while Victoria logged 16 new cases, down from 19.
We don't expect to see that number shift massively for the next few days, but we still want the community to be more vigilant than ever before, because I'm convinced that working together we will start to see those numbers nudge, and we are throwing all of our resources and all of our efforts to making that happen, and I just want to thank the community.
New South Wales also recorded an additional death from the virus, taking the total to 4 since the start of the year, and the national total to 914 since the pandemic began.
We are throwing everything at this. We want to come out of this lockdown as soon as possible. We want to make sure that we allow families and businesses in particular to bounce back as soon as we can, and that's why we're throwing everything at it in the next 2 weeks.
A day earlier, State Premier Gladys Berejiklian tightened restrictions on the city of 5 million people, including a shutdown of all building and property maintenance works and bans on some 600,000 people in the worst affected suburbs from leaving their immediate neighbourhood for work.
This Delta outbreak is telling us that there are settings with transmission that we really haven't seen before, and that transmission is happening in more and more of those places and to more and more people. I said yesterday the next 24-48 hours are critical. That remains the case.
Neighbouring Victoria, with 7 million people under a 5-day lockdown scheduled to end on Tuesday, said all 16 new cases were linked to no chains of transmission.
Australia's two largest states reported slight declines in new COVID-19 infections today. Nevertheless, its authorities warned that it could be days before the tough lockdown measures they have introduced can show progress in containing the spread of the Delta variant. That's the news. Stay with us for more shows.